right. So the goal of this exercise is to start adding some user authentication to our application. And that's going to solve the issue that I've had where if you guys use the same workspace endpoint as is in the repo, everybody can just see everything that everybody makes. That's typically not how most real world SaaS applications work, right? In most real world SaaS applications, people they only see the data that is scoped to either their self or to their team or something like that. Okay. So that's really the goal of this exercise. I'm not going to go through this whole document to begin with because really this is the talk in general. Okay. So how do we get that started? Well, excuse me. 8base has a nice handy package for us to be able to quickly add some authentication to our project. So I'm over here inside of VS Code. Okay, just making sure I'm up to date with main. Let me just see if there's anything else that needs to be pulled down here. Nothing else has been pushed up. That's okay. It's not going to stop me. All right, so what I want to do here is install the 8base auth package. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to run npm install at 8base /auth, and I want a very specific version. I'm going to say version 2.6.6. Okay, and I am going to install that. And while it's installing, let's hop over now to 8base. So if I Google 8base here, so yeah, this is the way I navigate the web. I don't use URLs. I use Google, right? Maybe I'm not alone. So when I log into 8base, we have the official Vue.js Forge project here. And the way you can manage access to things in 8base is via user roles. Okay, I can find all my user roles by going over to app services, and these are the ones that are currently, excuse me, currently already in place. You have an administrator role, which is essentially the person that can do everything and is what you get when you're inside of the 8base console, and you have the guest role. Okay, and this is everybody who comes to the app without logging in. Okay. If I click on this, you'll see kind of what I've been toggling a little bit on and off behind the scenes to try to keep things consistent for the speakers. Okay, so here we can set the roles for the we can set the permissions for the specific roles. Okay, so this is based on what table we're accessing. So right now, I'm allowing anybody with a guest role, so anybody who's not logged in, to read the boards. So let's read all records. Okay, I could say no records, and that means a guest has access to nothing. Okay, and then you have the same kind of thing going on for update, and you also have the ability to say whether or not this role should create or be able to create or delete these different resources. Okay, so let's go back over now. Actually, before we go back over to the app, let's do one other thing that's necessary for using authentication in 8base, and that is setting up an authentication profile. Okay. So this is just how we specify what kind of authentication service we want to use. And I'm just going to call it our app auth. And 8base has a built-in service, but you can also use your own services. So if you want to bring Auth to your 8base project, you can do that. If you want to use any other auth service that adheres to the OpenID spec, you can do that as well. All right. Oh, yep, I forgot here. I need to add the role. So let me go back over roles real quick. I want to create a specific role called subscriber. Okay, so this is different than a guest and different than a administrator in that this is someone who has signed up for the app. So I'll add the role. All right, back in authentication, let's add our authentication profile, and we'll just call it app auth. And here we can specify if we want it self sign up turned on or not. So this is essentially like, do I want to make sure nobody can get in and register by themselves, or can people register by themselves if they have an email at a certain domain, or is it open to for anybody to register and all? So we'll do open to all because that's typically how your SaaS apps work. All right, so I'm going to add this to the subscriber role. Next, after saving the authentication profile, we've got several different values that are displayed to us here. Okay, we've got a client ID, we've got a domain, a login URL, and a bunch of different things, and these are going to come in handy for connecting our app to the base auth service here. Okay, so what I want to do is I actually want to save some of these variables in a .env. Okay, so it looks like 8-base auth has installed here. We'll come back to that in just a moment. All right, so in my .env file, which if you aren't familiar with .env, or if you're familiar with using .env for other type projects that aren't necessarily Vue specific. So for instance, like I come from Laravel, .env was a was a little different. Because the .env in a Vue project actually does get saved to the repository. Okay, it is not in your getIgnore, and so anything you put in .env here does go to your repo. Now, if you want to avoid that, you can add a .env.local. Okay, and you'll notice here it's probably kind of hard to see. But this is grayed out just a little bit more than all these other things. That's because this .env.local file, it is not being tracked by Git. Okay. Now for a Vue project though, this doesn't happen a whole lot because you're building your app for the web browser, right? And so a lot of things that you're exposing are going to be public in the end anyway. So this .env, don't think of it as secure as you might think of it if you were coming from a different framework. Okay, all this stuff is going to essentially end up in the browser, at least if I prefix it with Vite. So that is kind of a caveat there. Anything that isn't prefixed with Vite in here will not be available on the browser side, but because it's in .env, it still will go to your repo. So keep that in mind. Okay. So how do we fill out these pieces of information? Well, the auth profile ID is going to be right here. Excuse me, guys. Let me get a cough drop. By the way, if you don't like traditional cough drops, I can't stand them. The Hall's breezers, I think they're called, are excellent. Anyways, you didn't want to know that. So this is our auth profile ID. Okay, we'll put it here. So in your .env, you can either put quotes or you can not put quotes. I found that putting quotes is helpful because if you wind up with a, I think it's a hashtag is a comment in here. Yeah, if we said hashtag there, yeah, you'll see how that now looks like it's commented out. Okay, every once in a while you'll have keys and stuff in here that will contain hashtags in them. So if you wrap this, yeah, that is no longer a comment. Okay, let me just to make sure. Let me just paste that in again. Okay. The next piece of information that I want to take a look at here is the domain. I can copy that, and that's going to go into the domain here. And then I also want to grab the client ID. And that goes into client ID here. Okay. All right, cool. So that goes a long way to getting things set up in the actual project. Next, what we want to do is actually set up the 8-base client based on the package that we just installed. All right. And I'm just going to grab a little piece of code here to help me out. And inside, we'll just call it a helpers directory, and we'll call it 8-base auth.ts. Okay. All right. So, so what is going on here? Well, first we're importing two different things from 8-base auth. Okay. First, we're importing the actual authentication client, and then we're importing just kind of like a um, an enum is what it calls it here. Essentially a constant kind of thing to make sure we're getting the proper strategy. So this refers to, are you doing that open ID? Are you doing the auth, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So now I'm just getting those environment variables from my .env file. So in Vite, this is how you grab an environment variable. They're available on import.meta.env. Okay. And then finally, I'm just actually creating my client. All right. And you have to pass in, of course, all the things to it. So let's see, what is the next step? So our next step is to create an auth user store. One, to kind of expose some of the methods that I can call on the auth client to the rest of the app. Now, I could just call the auth client, import it into anywhere else in my app, and I could use those directly. But because I'm wrapping this up in a Pina store, I can also I can expose functionality, but I can also store state, right? And so that's going to be important for working with the auth user. So once again, I am going to grab the auth user store from some code that I've already written here because it is a little lengthy. I loaded myself up, and I think some of the other sessions with quite a task in some of this. All right, so let's create the stores, and then we're going to create a file called auth user store.ts. Okay. All right, so let's see what I've pasted in here. So the imports, let's just kind of ignore those for now. And I've got to end up kind of fixing a few of those to better reflect the current state of the app. But the important thing here is that we're importing the auth client from 8-base auth. Okay. Why is that a red? Cannot find module at helpers. Did I spell it differently? Let's just try this. So I'll say @/help. I named a helper. Okay, this is where your IDE can help you out. Okay, so here we have the auth client. So a couple of different actions that I want to expose from my auth user store is a login action, and this is just going to call auth client.authorize. Okay, so this is just going to allow me to log in to the application, right? Let's go ahead and utilize that in order to create a way for users to log in. So the way I like to do this is I actually like to create a dedicated page for login. This allows you to go to like /login directly or /logout in another case to perform these kind of actions instead of it necessarily being always triggered via a click on a button or something like that. It's based on a route. Okay. So I'm going to say login.view here. All right. And here I'm going to use script setup and lang TypeScript in order to work with my composable. So use auth store. You can call it a store. You can call it an composable. It's really the same thing. It's a Pina store. More specifically, it's a composable more generally. Okay. So /stores /auth user store, and we want to import use auth user store. Okay. So now I just want to grab that and use it, use auth user store. Okay. And then I just want to call login. Not log out, log in. So now when we visit login, our login function or action is going to be called. And so let's go back over to the auth user store now. So what this is actually going to do under the hood is when we call auth client to authorize, if we're not already logged in, that's going to give us a login form, a login page. Okay, let's test that out really quick and just see what happens. I'm kind of expecting an error, but let's just see. Okay. Okay, interesting. So nothing, this page still looks good. Let's try /login. Right. Okay. So I still need to update some things in my auth user store. Okay, so let me actually just comment out several of these things real quick while we see the login. Okay. Folding is a big friend of mine. I don't know why that's not folding. I think it ends here. Is that right? That. Okay. Let's give that a try. That no red squiggly lines. Awesome. And then we want to get rid of these. That's the important. Okay. Now when I visit /login, let's refresh again. So error loading dynamically imported module. Am I still trying to load something that I don't have? At 8base auth.js. What is that? Let's go back here and let's just comment that out and see where we get there. Yeah, it's definitely in that file. Okay. Let me think for one moment, guys. So the error is new modules was blocked because disallowed MIME type, and that's new module 8base auth.js. All right. Whoop. I don't know what that did. All right. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to move on to not necessarily showing login just yet. We'll see that in just a minute. And maybe I just need to clean up a little bit more of this first. All right. So the next function inside of our auth user store is this init user function. Okay. And essentially what we're going to do in here, this is going to be able to be called when our app loads to initialize a user, a logged in user within our state. Okay. So what this does is called a function called fetch user. And all fetch user does is make a request to 8base using the Apollo client. Okay. And it's got a current user query. Let me go ahead and copy and paste that current user query in just so we can kind of see a little bit of what that looks like. Okay. Under GraphQL in queries, we'll add one called current user.query.gql. Right. Oop. And this says current user here, so let's change this to match that current user. Okay. So essentially, we want to get the user with their ID and some different information from them, as well as whatever teams they're on. That should probably be plural, but it's not that way in the database. So it is team for all of our teams, and what roles they have. Perfect. All right. So let's import that now for our current user query instead of this current user query. All right. So I will import current user query current user query from @/GraphQL /query /current user query GQL. Okay. This is actually important in Vite. A lot of times, it really expects that you add file extensions on your imports. Okay. It's okay. It's okay that you don't add like the JS and the TS file extensions, but for Vue, you actually do have to do that. So a lot of times, just know that it's important to add file extensions. Okay, so let's take that graph current user query right down here. Okay, and Apollo client. I thought we were. Let's do that back in. So the Apollo client is coming from at GraphQL / Apollo client like that now. Okay. And I think this is now more like that. Yeah. Okay. So this Apollo client is just over here in GraphQL. This is where we set up the actual client, right? And we're exporting it under the name Apollo client. All right. So that gets a init user, I think, mostly working. So next is logout. Okay. So logout, we're just going to call auth client, which is that 8-base client, and call logout on it. And then I will set some state in my Pina store, okay, up here to false because we're no longer authenticated. Okay. And I'm going to clear out my ID token. So when you log in to a service, you're always going to get an auth token or an ID token or some kind of secret token or whatever that you can use to authorize yourself on subsequent requests. It just says, hey, I know that you've got a little piece of data on your side that matches this string, and you can be rest assured that when I make the request, this is me. Okay. All right. So that's what that ID token is. And then finally, I'm going to remove that item from local storage. Okay. So in order to persist my login across page reloads, we just store that ID token in local storage when it exists. Okay. So that's the whole idea there. All right. So now let's uncomment out this unwieldy block and talk about it for just a moment. I missed this one. Okay. So this handle authentication is what we want to call when we hear back from 8-base. So after we log in, 8-base is going to do its thing and check that our credentials are right, check that our username and password is correct, and then it's going to send back a response to a callback URL. Okay, and that callback URL is going to call this handle authentication function. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is call auth client.get authorized data. That's going to give us the essentially what's in the URL string of our callback. Okay, there'll be some kind of secret information there, your tokens, your like your name and things like that. Okay, so then the first thing we want to do is just check to see if the user actually exists in 8-base, and if it doesn't exist already, we can just go ahead and update the user or create the user. Okay. Let's go ahead and grab this user sign-on mutation, and I'll make a file for that. Okay, queries. I'm typing in the wrong place. Queries, new file, user sign up. This would be under mutations. I'll do that in a second. Mutation.gql. Okay. And I'll move that into mutations here. All right. By the way, guys, let me check. Once again, I had a timer going and I didn't start it. So definitely jump in and let me know if I'm running over time. This is a long exercise. We might not get through it all. All right. So here is my user sign up mutation. So let me just name that the same, user sign up, and matches this here. I like that. Okay. And then we'll import it over here. All right. And this is now going to be under mutations / user sign up mutation. Awesome. Okay. So now we want to use this right down here. Okay. So in this mutation, I am passing in the email from the result of the callback from the callback, and then I'm just creating. So this is where we could be on our own, just see our own stuff, but that's not how a Trello clone works. You belong to a team on Trello typically, and so we are going to create a team for our new user here, and their default team will just be their first name, and it's their team. Okay, and the auth profile ID we get from the EMV. All right, and this is what's now very important. Now we're adding an authorization header to our GraphQL mutation. And now we can get that token directly from the callback URL. Okay. And so then lastly, we're setting some state that authenticated is now true. And we're storing in our state, in our Pina state. So that's always available now throughout our app. We're storing that ID token now. And then we're storing it in local storage to persist it across page loads. All right. Awesome. Excuse me. Let's see, what else do we need to do? Let me look at my document here. So we need to create an auth callback route. Okay, cool. Let's get the. Oh, did I hear somebody in my ear?
Hello, Danielle. So I think yeah, if you would like to have like some more time, just take your time
Sure.
if you would like. If like 5 minutes more, it's fine.
Cool.
Right?
Wow,
Yeah.
I
Okay.
spent way more time on this than I intended to. So all good. So here's what I want to do next. I will push up the complete code for this after this talk. Let me just go over a couple other concepts with you. Okay. So so over here in 8-base, what you can do under roles and then under subscriber, and when you are creating these filters here to kind of say who has access to what, you can actually, there are rote ones saying no records, all records, and then user records that uses that created by property on your data in order to say, okay, simply just limit access to this to the user who created it. All right. But we can also add custom filters in 8-base. Okay. Let me grab one of those custom filters, and this is on the document, so you can use these same exact filters. Okay, so what this is going to do is going to say, let me access the boards where let me access the boards that have a team related to them. Okay, so now instead of just having boards related to users, we have boards related to teams. Okay, so give me all the boards with that have a team where the user of that team, where one of the users of that team anyway, equals the logged in user ID. Okay, so you can see how basically we're using like filters. I'm more of an SQL kind of guy, but basically we're using like where statements, right, to just kind of narrow it down to what's available based on that logged in user ID. Okay, and the place that let me paste that back in there. The place that logged in user ID is going to come from, that's going to come from the authorization header that we send with our Apollo client. Okay, so if I open up over here and go to Apollo client.ts, what we'll want to do is we will want to include that token. Excuse me. We want to include that token. I'm spelling something wrong. Apollo client. Okay. we are going to want to include that token in our Apollo client. So that looks something like this. So right now we've got a link being created, but we want to create another link, which is an authorization link. Okay. So now we can in here just use our auth store. So that means I need to import use auth user store from the stores here. Okay. And then we can just check, because we have that authenticated state, remember, on the store. We can check if that exists, then add the token from the store onto my headers as an authorization header. Okay. Otherwise, just do it like you were doing before. Awesome. All right. So once again, I guess I am about out of time here. We aren't going to get it all hooked up, but I will certainly push the code up for this momentarily to where you can see it all working in action and see going through all those steps. So, all right. Do you guys have any questions? All right. Sorry, let me get into Vito here. Medhat, if you're watching, you can field those questions for me. Otherwise, I will start looking in
Yeah,
Vito.
yeah,
Awesome. Cool.
absolutely, absolutely. What an awesome session! Finally, you're doing it yourself. You're not just giving instructions for that. So thank you very much for this. Of course, great session. So let me jump in directly and try to grab some questions for you, because
Okay.
actually people filled a lot of questions for you. So let's just start from this easy one. Let me remove this first. Okay, why did you all choose to develop a Trello clone for this event? Yeah, that's a
Okay.
question for you, especially because you're the one who decided to design this application. So yeah,
Sure.
tell us a little bit more.
It was a bit of a process, with some confusion around it, and it finally came to what we're doing here. But yeah, we just thought it would be a kind of good dynamic application, a fun application that we could build together that really could have real world use cases. Now, I don't think anybody's going to compete with Trello, but you get the idea. It's a lot of things that you can learn by building such an application, for sure.
Yeah, sounds great. Of
Excuse me.
course, yeah, it's kind of a bit complete application. I mean, collecting a lot of things, so you can learn quite a lot as a Vue.js developer out of this clone, right? So it's yeah,
Yep,
and of
that's right.
course,
And it's, and
mhm,
it's more than just Vue.js. There are lots of Vue.js in particular courses out there. And of course, we want to do everything in Vue.js here because we love Vue.js, but it's also kind of about, hooking up Vue.js apps to the ecosystem. And ultimately, you're not going to be building all your apps in Vue.js. You're going to be hooking up to other things, other services, right? And that's one thing we really wanted to showcase in this event.
which is a great thing. Yeah, in this moment, I would like to just plug in as well the next Vue.js Forge. It will be a new application for the person who asked this question. It will be an e-commerce. Most probably, Daniel will design it as well, so he will talk about it a bit later. Thanks, Daniel. So the next question is, what's your preferred way of working with Vue.js? Is it a composition API or options API, and why?
Um, Ask me 8 months ago, and I probably would have said options API, right? Um, I spent a lot of time at Vue School developing courses and things like that, and I have developed a liking for for working with the composition API during those courses and things. And obviously, a lot of the community is pushing towards that, so I kind of have to keep up with that and keep the material relevant and fresh. Um, but yes, I do enjoy the composition API. I've never used it in an actual production project like with former employers, but it just
Mhm.
wasn't around really yet, right? So I do enjoy the composition
Yeah, so more votes for composition API today.
API.
I love it. All right, and next question is, the boilerplate code of the event is written in TypeScript. Do I have to use TypeScript? And maybe it's matched with another question as well. What do you prefer to write, is TypeScript or plain JavaScript as well?
um, I kind of same answer as the composition API question. Is I'm much more comfortable with with JavaScript and I have more experience with it, but probably within that past 8 months or so, I've really gotten a good grasp on TypeScript and have definitely seen a lot of benefits to it. Yeah, the typing system is just really nice and helps me think a little bit less, which is always a good thing.
Yeah, that's a great thing. Right. So let's jump for the next question. Is why not to use Nuxt.js for the project? That's a question from someone. Yeah,
That's
why not?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Why not use Nuxt 3 to build a Trello clone? We probably could have. Um, we probably could have. The main thing is it's still in beta, and for a for a live event such as this, that might have been a little risky. Not that we didn't do other risky things, but that would have been one more to add to the table, right? So that was the main reason. Um, the second thing is we did in fact, of course, use it for the landing page, and this is really, at least in my experience, I've never built a Nuxt app that renders on the server side like based on a request, right? That's actually running Node on the server. I've always used Nuxt for static site generation, and
Mhm.
it's a perfect pairing for a landing page like we've built.
Yeah, you're right. And most probably for this clone as well, for something like Trello, you don't really need SSR that much, I would say. That's
Exactly.
why.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, and of course you can run Nuxt as full on SPA mode.
But
But
why?
well, why? Right.
Adding more overhead on yourself, just create a Vue.js application.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a great answer, of
I,
course.
I will say
We-
there are some niceties in Nuxt, like not having to import certain things and some types auto generated and things like that for you,
yeah,
that could make it useful for an SPA. But Vite, man, the plugin system Vite has is really cool, and you
yeah.
saw some features that we could have just got out of the box with Nuxt that were easily plugged into just a Vite project. So that was cool.
Yeah. I love Nuxt as well, and the core team as well. They care too much about the developer experience that makes it really cool for people. Even if you're creating a single page app, that's true. For the sake of the DX of Nuxt, you might just switch it there instead of creating it in plain Vue.js. Maybe you can consider this in the next Vue.js Forge. Could be. So
For sure.
yeah,
Hey, if we get
thanks
the
for that.
stable version, I am all on top of it.
Yeah, for the person who asked this question, we're waiting for that. If you create it with Nuxt the whole clone yourself, you can just mention it to Vue School, and yeah, then you can review it. So yeah, that's a good thing as well. As you might know, all over the day with different sessions, we have tons of questions, but for the sake of time, there's a lot of people asking questions and putting great comments in the chat. So please go ahead and answer them directly to the chat. So
Will
yeah,
do.
they will enjoy your answer, of course.
Awesome.
Thank you very
Awesome.
much
Thank
again,
you.
Danielle, for the great session. Thanks.